Okay. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the fire test. Safety first, obviously. But really wanted to say, welcome to today's panel. We're really excited to have you here. So us together with Everest and Guidewire and Lloyd's Gender Inclusion Network, really delighted to welcome you to today's panel talking about the 3 phases of a woman's career. As we go through the panel, we'll be discussing the challenges, but also the immense opportunities that each of those different phases provide. And it's our hope that you'll leave today with strategies, inspiration, and really practical tips on how to navigate those different phases of a woman's career. And we also invite you to participate and ask questions as we go along. There'll be a QR code on the screen, and you can just pop all of your questions in there, and we'll get to the Q&A afterwards. But first, to kick us off, I'd like to invite up our keynote today, and that's Tamu Thomas. So Tamu is a coach and author, and she uses evidence-based trauma-informed tools to help professional women take control of their careers. And her books, which you can find in the swag bags of Women Who Work Too Much, is really an extension of her work. So please join me in welcoming Tamu.
Morning, everybody. Is my microphone? Yes, you can hear me. Morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am delighted to be here. Warning, my daughter went back to college and brought back a cough. So intermittently, I may sound like Dot Cotton. I don't smoke 1,000 cigarettes a day, but just to give you warning, I'm perfectly fine. It just is very raspy. So I'm really delighted to be here today on the 10th anniversary of the Dive In Festival, and also to be talking about a topic that is really close to my heart. So you've all got a copy of my book in your bag. Please do read it. Leave me a review on Amazon, which was very kindly facilitated by the Lloyd's Gender Equity Group. And the book is about finding your joy. And joy is one of my core values, hence wearing bright red on a gloomy day. And it's because we forget that we work to support how we live. And my choice is to live joyfully. And in my practice as a coach, I noticed that lots of the women I work with were unable to live joyfully, were unable to even rest because work consumed everything they did. And I noticed a pattern of toxic productivity. And toxic productivity is the obsessive, compulsive need to be productive all the time. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter whether you work in a profession, whether you're a stay-at-home parent. It is the need to be doing something productive with your time all the time. So I won't even go into the details, but I'm sure you've got a hint about what I'm talking about. And what I recognized is that the way we work, we treat ourselves like machines. We want to continue to do more and more and more all the time in the same way without giving ourselves the grace of being humans. So we use words like consistent and discipline, which means doing the same thing the same way all the time. Now, I don't know about you, but as a woman with a cycle that impacts the way I operate, it's not possible for me to operate the same way all the time. There are some times where I'm way more productive, and there are some times where I'm way more contemplative, and I'm able to be really deeply analytical and able to gestate the things that are going on around me that serves me in that productivity phase. And I think it's time that we, as career women, as women who are very ambitious, recognize that when we work with who we are, instead of trying to condense ourselves like we're on some kind of conveyor belt, we will be able to do more without working all the time. So when I was contacted about this opportunity, I was really interested because I had never heard of the 3 phases of a woman's career before. But as soon as I read the labels, I thought this makes so much sense. And it really aligns with my experience of toxic productivity. So I'm going to refer to my notes so I get it right. Idealistic achievement is the first phase. This is when you're technically young, full of energy, and you're experimenting. You're putting your hat in the ring. You're trying to do loads of different things because you're gaining experience. You're trying to get to understand what you like, what your strengths are, what you're good at, the things that make you leap out of bed in the morning, the things that you feel like, oh no, I don't want to do that again. So you're building a solid foundation for you and your career. And that is a time for you to be really productive, doing all the things. Then we step into the next phase, pragmatic endurance. And this is where you're gaining more responsibilities. You are becoming more senior in your role. There are more people looking to you for guidance. You're becoming more and more of an expert in your field. You're starting to really refine who you are and what you do and what you bring to your organization. You cannot continue to be as productive as you were in the idealistic phase, because now it's time to start to sharpen your focus, to become more precise about who you are and what you do. That is a time for you to begin to say no to things, to develop healthy boundaries that enable you to say yes to the things that you're really good at. So that, I don't know if any of you have read the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, where he talked about your zone of incompetence, your zone of competence, your zone of excellence, and your zone of genius. This is when you're stepping into that zone of excellence and you're working out where your genius is. It's not sustainable to continue to operate at that level of productivity. And generally speaking, that's the time of life when we start to take on more responsibilities in our personal lives. Maybe we're settling down in relationships. We may be thinking about or beginning to have children. Sometimes it's that our parents are getting older and they're beginning to have caring responsibilities. So we physically don't have the same amount of energy we had previously. So it's really important for us to take stock and stop trying to be everything to everyone and have boundaries that allow us to shine. And then there is the third phase, which is all about re-inventive contribution. This is when you are the go-to in your field. This is when people start to ask you for advice more and more, not just people within your department. This is when you are asked for your expertise. Maybe you become a bit of a corporate superstar, so you're being invited to speak on panels, you are doing keynotes, and maybe you're doing some research projects, and you're contributing to the wider organization. This is a time of legacy. During this period of time, you are probably mentoring more people, you are sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. So this is a time when you need to be really choosy about what you're doing so that you're operating more and more in that zone of genius. And there's a Pareto's rule, the 80-20 rule, where the 20% of what you do is creating the 80% of your output. So this is a period of time where if you are still operating in toxic productivity, you might feel lots of guilt when people ask you a question, you're able to answer it, and that's it. You don't then have to do the doing, you're delegating it, you're passing the baton on. It's really important for us to recognize these stages, especially as women in the workplace who often get asked to do busy work that doesn't necessarily support our progression. It's important for us to note these phases and understand where we are within those phases so that we can operate within our strengths and be the best we can be, do a good full day's work, and then go home most of the time to relax. Maybe be stressed out by teenage children who want everything they see on ASOS. So I'm looking forward to being able to delve into this discussion with these panelists. I was fortunate enough to be able to be on a briefing call, and I was making little notes myself based on the things these women were sharing. And the purpose is for us to be able to operate in manners that are sustainable and where possible, regenerative. When we stay in that idealistic phase for too long, trying to be the yes person, wanting to make sure people knew that we are committed, we are dedicated, we are ambitious, and we are in it for the long haul, we can mistake and think that saying yes to all the things and doing all the things all the time is the way forward, where actually the further you go up your career, the more you need to prune those bits off so that you can focus on your strengths without the guilt, because that's something that holds us back a lot. So we're going to be going into this conversation. It's not all doom and gloom. The purpose is that we want you to recognize that saying no to things, having boundaries, and being selective about what you do are the sorts of things that enable you not just to have an illustrious career, but something that is sustainable. We talk a lot about burnout. There are record numbers of people experiencing burnout, and there are things that we can do as individuals to limit the possibilities of burnout and to shift the cultures we work in so that we create anti-burnout cultures. So this is what we are going to talk about today. I'm on time. So I would like to welcome Ali, Lisa, and Kelly so we can begin our conversation.
These aren't that easy to get on.
They look good. So good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, welcome. If we could start with you, Kelly, to introduce yourself and tell the people here a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Kelly Ogley. I actually work for Howden, so welcome to our amazing building. I'm the CEO of Consumer and Local Commercial, so that's basically our high street branch network. I've been in the insurance industry for 38 years. I've got a 22-year-old daughter and I'm a single parent. I'm really passionate about these topics.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Annie.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So hi, I'm Ali Redding. I'm a senior account executive at Guidewire. I'm responsible for sales across the UK and South Africa, and selling our solution that solves the software as a service, but really making sure that that's aligned to our customers, our prospects, strategic objectives. As well as my role in sales, I also sit as the UK chapter lead for our ERG, which is focused obviously on making an inclusive workplace across gender inequality.
And last but not least, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm Lisa Skinner. I'm the International Head of Accident Health at Everest Insurance. I also co-chair the DEI Council there. I've worked in the industry for almost 20 years, various different London market entities, and I've got 2 children, aged 6 and 13.
Brilliant. So first question is, well, first of all, before the question is, what advice do you have for people in their idealistic achievement phase, which is the beginning of your career, you're buoyant, you're full of energy, you want to do everything. I just want you to take a moment now and think about yourself when you were at that phase. What advice would you give yourself now, bearing in mind who you were at that phase? And because you are right next to me, Kelly, I'm going to start with you.
It's a deep question. I think really when I look back, and my daughter's at that phase now, so it's nice to reflect, she's 22. When I look back, I think it's just really enjoy it, get curious and use the time to get to know you and get to know where you get your energy from, what you enjoy, because that'll help frame your career going forward. But I think you have got a lot of energy at that stage. You've got less pressures on you externally. So it's really, don't miss the moment to get curious, enjoy it, and find out a bit more about you. And I think sometimes at that phase, you can think, it's, oh, well, a work-life balance. I've heard a lot about work-life balance, and that is really important, and Tamu speaks really, really well about it. But equally, it's the time when you have got the energy and you've got the time and the space to get curious and really get to know yourself.
Yeah, and surprise, I'm going straight to you, Lisa.
Yeah, just adding to what Kelly's saying, it's really just be brave and don't be afraid to challenge things. That you can learn a lot of things from a lot of different people. And at this point in your career is a really good opportunity to start thinking about having a mentor. So personally, for me, I had a number of mentors through my career, not just a manager or somebody that you work for, but in a different job role, which I found really, really valuable. And I was actually on an interesting panel, listening to an interesting panel on Diving this morning about reverse mentoring and what that can bring, where the reverse mentees actually give themselves an opportunity to really look at a holistic approach and a holistic view of things whilst learning everything themselves.
Yeah. And of course, Ali.
Yeah, so I think absolutely echoing the points you shared in terms of being curious, making sure that you say yes to as much as you physically can take on at that stage, and maybe taking some of the pressure off of thinking you need to know what role do you want to do, and I'm going to be this type of role, or I'm going to be in this position, and actually how much of saying yes to all of those different experiences shapes actually where your career continues to evolve from.
And I think adding to that, Ali, I think there's too much pressure to have mapped out your career and say, you know, oh, I know exactly where I'm going to go and I need to do that role, I need to get this. And I think, you know, having a career vision is great, but don't feel the pressure to know exactly what you've got to do to get there. Just, you know, take every opportunity that comes your way and don't go, well, that does not pay rise with that one. If it gives you more exposure, it gives you more experience, take the opportunity. Absolutely.
So what I'm hearing is that this is an opportunity to get to know yourself, so to treat it more like an adventure. I'm just going to add my own little question in here. We're in the age of social media, and there's lots of social media advice and gurus, like 20-year-old gurus who are giving other 20-year-olds advice about having boundaries and not being taken advantage of. What for you is the, and especially in the roles you're in now, for somebody who's at that idealistic phase, what is the difference between being open to opportunities and putting yourself in a position where you're being taken advantage of? Because I think that's really what people are trying to avoid. Anybody who...
Yeah, I always seem to talk a lot. I think it's a real fine line because you're right, they're going to get that advice. So I can hear, you know, some of my daughter's peers potentially saying to her, oh, well, you know, they're taking advantage of you. Why are you working that extra hour? Why aren't you coming out? And it is important to have boundaries, but you create them yourself. So it's about what's important to you and to your future rather than maybe what your peer group says or what, you know, something on TikTok says. So it's about being comfortable that they're your personal boundaries, because this is the stage where, as you've got the energy, you've got the time, and get curious. And that often will mean that you're doing a bit of extra of an evening or whatever it might be. But that's a great opportunity. But make sure you're choosing to do it and nobody's making you do it.
Yeah.
And maybe exploring as well sometimes what's the intention of maybe that task or that activity that you've been given or the work you're getting involved in. Because sometimes there is real merit if, for example, if you are involved in taking some of the minutes or some of the actions or in organising an event or there's different areas, actually what's some of the skills that you will really get from that and obtain from that. So I think sometimes exploring, what's the experiences you can get as opposed to sometimes thinking, oh, I don't think that's the type of thing I should be getting involved in. So the intention behind it.
Lisa?
Yeah, just picking up on that really and taking as much as you can from as many different people, because you can learn a lot from different roles and different people that you're working for or working with.
I think that sometimes at that age it can be a little bit like, well, it's not in the job description. Why have I been asked to do that? And it's, you know, to Ali's point, it's saying actually what is it you can take from that opportunity, and is that going to enrich you? Are you going to learn something? Is it going to help you? Even if it is minute taking, you're learning from the senior people and the more experienced people in the room. And I just think you can learn by osmosis and experience.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on the being brave that was mentioned at the beginning. So you've been asked to do the minutes in that senior meeting. How can somebody in that position be brave? What's something they can do with that experience so that they are enriching themselves and they are benefiting?
I think for me,
I'm going to start with Lisa.
I think perhaps they could have a read through, you know, take on board what they're saying, and maybe there's some things in there that they don't quite understand because it was said at a more experienced level. Actually, you know, take some time and go and approach that person, you know, at the right time and say, would you be able to just explain this to me? Because I noticed that I was taking the minutes and I'd quite like to understand what this was about. And I think, you know, there's lots of things you can pick up from learning from the more senior people. Of course, you need to approach it at the right time. If you're, you know, in a particularly important meeting and it's not quite finished, not the right time to approach it, but, you know, take the time afterwards to really think about what did you hear and what could you learn from.
Yeah.
And interestingly, our Chief People Officer was talking about sense making recently. That's done at an individual and obviously at a kind of a group and organisational level. And I think there again is understanding as well is what when you're taking those minutes, yes, okay, there may be a pure action, which is document the minutes accurately, be able to share them back. But is there some key trends that you saw in there? Is there areas that you could be curious? Is there some questions or insights that maybe you could share as that kind of impartial outsider experience as well? So I think picking the timing of where you have those discussions, but being able to add that further value beyond obviously the task in hand as well.
And I think it might not just be from taking the minutes, for example. You may be in a meeting, you might be in a meeting with external or internal stakeholders that something you just quite didn't understand, or you think, actually, why is that? Or why I'm not sure that I agree with that. You can't, it is okay to challenge things if you approach them in the right way.
And I think as well as learning from sort of the things that you might hear and the technicalities, it's learning from the behaviours. So observing, so you might be in a meeting where there's a bit of a conflict, or there's a discussion, or there's something that needs to be problem solved. So just watching and observing, how does somebody handle that when somebody was like maybe a little bit more abrupt? And how do they diffuse that situation? Because I'd like to be able to do that next time I'm chairing a meeting. So I think there's a lot of technicalities, but there's also the behaviours, because communication skills are incredibly important at every single level. And I think if you can hone those communication skills at this stage in your career, it just makes everything else a lot easier.
Chef's kiss, beautiful. So what I'm taking away is that this is a period of being really curious, curious about yourself, curious about your role, curious about the value you can add. And when you're operating from that lens of curiosity, the things you don't know don't feel like the big bad wolf. It's actually something that you're curious about. You're also beginning to develop networks because you are developing a relationship with somebody by saying, I want to know more about this, or I wasn't quite sure about this. So it's a really beautiful opportunity to be like wildly curious. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So now the pragmatic endurance phase. You've done your idealistic bit, you're getting noticed, your work is being commended, you have got a more senior role, you've got more responsibility, and then you decide to have a baby, or you decide to do something which means that your personal life is also requiring more of your attention. So in your experience, how do you manage this middle phase? How do you manage the juggle of your humanity and also needing to be a human being that is performing at work? Ali.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think here one of the things that resonates really with me is about setting SMART goals. I think at this stage, there's often maybe multi-year ambitions, really large goals as an organisation or as in your role that you're working towards. So that ability to kind of break it down with SMART goals, so that you can see obviously what are the contributions you're making, how yourself, the team are performing, and being able to measure that, whether it's on a weekly, quarterly basis. I think alongside that is very important is about celebrating success. I think very often we can really focus on that long-term ambition, that multi-year goal, but there's so many markers within that we need to take a moment and say, either as an individual or as a team, we really did well there, and mark it and actually celebrate that.
I really appreciate that. Lisa, picking up from that, when we had our briefing call, you were talking about being able to have it all. How does SMART goals enable you to have it all, personally and professionally?
I think really it gives you some time, a little bit of time for reflection in terms of what you've done. Maybe you have some time out to have a baby, as you suggested, but you can really think about where do you want to go next, and really start to think about your prioritization of your tasks, both personally and professionally. So what is most important, what can you do, what can't you do, and making sure you communicate that very well to everybody. For me personally, I find communication is key. As long as my kids know this is a London day, you're at work, you're doing this, you're not going to be home for late, or next week you're travelling, it does work well. And I think it sets a really good example and role model to them that you can be working and be in senior leadership positions and do everything that you need to do with them at home too.
Before I move over to Kelly, I want to pick up on that role modelling piece. So you're role modelling for the people at home. Maybe they're not your children, maybe it's your partner, whoever it is. How does you operating like that impact you as a role model in your team?
In terms of the what you're doing
Yeah, so lots of times organisations will talk about their values, they will talk about what they believe in, they will talk about their strengths, but sometimes, and their policies and stuff, but sometimes they can end up on an internet or intranet somewhere and they're not really lived and breathed. And when you are actually role modelling that, what does that do for your team? How does that support the relationships with the team?
I think it sets a good culture for the team to recognise. We want to be inclusive, and why can't somebody who's a parent who's got to do school drops or additional things can't be in exactly the same position? So I think it sets the tone for the team, which is important, helps to build inclusivity in the team, and really bring everybody together. Because I think if you see somebody doing something in a certain way, naturally as humans we tend to follow and feel that that's okay and get a level of comfort. So
yes. Take note, what we role model really counts. And then Kelly, for you, how does this resonate with you, and how has this impacted you when you were at that phase of your career?
So I think this phase is actually quite a tough phase because it's demanding. You've got, potentially personal demands, whether that be your parents, children, friends, siblings, and then you've got your work demands, and you've not quite got in your groove at work, so you're doing well, etc. So I think you have to be kind to yourself. So, it's great that we can do everything, but, you think, actually, today I've not done such and such. That microwave meal didn't kill her. So it's just being able to say that was okay. That was, but sometimes you're, I didn't do a home cooked meal, or I didn't do this. And it's just taking a step back and go, what did I do? And where have I been successful? And then just give yourself a little bit of time as a person, not just as somebody in work or, potentially a parent. And then building on what Lisa said and Tamu's question, I think it's really important that we do lead by example, because we can't say it's important that, you get a work-life balance and then go, I didn't go to the nativity because I was too busy. That nativity will not happen again. And the times you do miss things, I actually missed my daughter when she was 3 singing on her own, but I got in for the dress rehearsal. So there's finding ways around it that work for you and work for your family balance, but be kind to yourself and praise the positives. And if it is about, if I'd take me as an example, my daughter would now say I'm a great role model. The fact that, she had to change her own bedding didn't really hurt her.
And I think that's a really good point about being able to share those experiences and that kind of outward in terms of what are the other responsibilities, what else is going on that makes up your authentic self. Is sometimes when you're not seeing it, you don't actually know, okay, how is everyone else struggling this? Whereas actually when people say, I do actually need to get back for parents' evening, or actually there's something else where I've got responsibilities for my parents, or I need to walk the dog, whatever it might be. But I actually think putting it out there as opposed to us all pretending that nothing else happens outside of work. And then I think it just further reinforces that everyone can feel quite isolated. Yes. So sharing that vulnerabilities, those responsibilities, I think is key as part of that role model piece.
I think it's key as a leader, because that shows that it's authentically leading. And I think that people can really resonate with that. They really then want to work hard for you. I think it adds that authenticity as a leader.
I've had a number of occasions where on paper it says, like, we support you, your child comes first. And when I get that phone call from school that my daughter's been ill, like the subconscious grimace on my manager's face, like, oh man, we're gonna have to find cover or something. So what we role model and what we demonstrate with our body language is really important. So one of my fascinations, my obsessions, is our autonomic nervous system and how that influences who we are and how we are. And one of the things I love about that, it really humanizes what we have made seem like it's not very human. One of those is the fact that we're hardwired for connection. We need connection with other human beings in order to survive, never mind thrive. So thinking about that need for connection in this pragmatic endurance phase, where you have got a lot to prove, let's be honest about it, and you're very, very ambitious, how can tapping into that human need for connection support us at this phase? Annie, seeing as you nodded.
So interesting there, I think when you talk about pragmatic endurance, actually this has really come very personal to me this year, is particularly with my line of work at the moment, I'm finding that it never gets quieter. So Christmas isn't getting any quieter, the summer break doesn't get quieter. So to be successful, you talk about that kind of, again, those techniques, being sustainable in terms of the approach, we've got to be able to apply those different techniques. And it's about kind of thinking through is, what are those boundaries? So enabling people the work-life balance, again, practicing that as a role model. But if people are on holiday, actually supporting them that they can recharge, they can reset there. And I think it comes back to, in terms of one of the things I've been looking into more is around burnout. And you mentioned it's so real for so many people. And if we don't actually start to address what's some of the techniques, what's the different things you start to feel of, I am overwhelmed, I'm exhausted. And it talks a lot about actually how do you complete your stress cycle? And some of that's around exercise, breathing exercises as well, but also social interaction. So whether that's as affection, they mention a 7-second kiss is apparently really helpful for making sure finding what's right for you to solve that stress cycle, so that you can actually truly switch off, as opposed to going, I've been at work and then, okay, right now I'm expected to suddenly be able to switch into the next mode. So personal and professional life, find what was going to work for you for solving for that stress cycle.
I'll just add to that not the same thing works for everyone. So what you listen to your best friend or your partner or some of your other work colleagues suggest, it doesn't always work for you, and you do have to find that right balance for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be, as simple as having a great group of friends that you go out with, you socialise with, you can say anything to, but it is, as Lisa said, finding out what works for you. Sometimes my friends are like, contact me at 8 o'clock at night. Oh, I just thought it'd be great to have a catch up. No, I'm tired. I want to sit with my Kindle now. But not being afraid to say no, because they think that's a good time for a catch up. But equally, Saturday afternoon, I'll be there.
And what about relationships within the workplace? Because, there are lots of techniques we can adopt to complete that stress cycle, but sometimes we can't, jog around the office. We can't do some EFT tapping or something. What role do allies within the workplace play in relation to being able to manage those stresses and also those joys? Because a lot of us sometimes don't want to be seen to be showing off. We don't want to be seen to be bragging. We worry that the rug's going to be pulled from under us. We'd like start forbidding joy. What can we do, thinking more about that connection, to develop allies within our workspaces? Okay, that nod was very emphatic. Yes, please, Annie.
So I think whether it's through your ERG, so your employee resource groups, or again within your teams, but being able to help build that network, I think, inside and outside of work. So inside, again, having people's back. I think you want to make sure that, again, it's those people within your support network, how do they behave when you're not in that room? So how do actually people make sure that they're not throwing people under the bus, they support one another, and how you actually make sure that you also embody those qualities. So I think there's areas there. I think, again, you also know where your team or you can be kind of pushed outside of your comfort zone and really thrive. So being able to support them in terms of identifying those opportunities. And again, the professional and personal life, they're not exclusive. So how do you make sure that, again, where additional support is needed, being able to set up the inclusive environment for them to thrive?
And I think getting to know people as an individual, back down to that being authentic. We all spend an awful lot of time in work, but make sure we get to know each other, get to understand what is going on at home, what's going on that could challenge them, so that if they are a little bit off that day, something's happened. And equally, have people that you can reach out to and you can be really honest with.
I did a session for an organisation, and it was about connection and belonging in the workplace. And one of the questions I asked was, what makes you feel connected and like you belong? And one of the responses were, when I'm off sick and people check in just to check in, not because they want to know where I stored this thing or the other thing. So that's really important. I was going to come to you, Lisa, but we haven't got that much longer. We've been having such a fruitful discussion. So I want to get into that re-inventive contribution phase. And very, very quickly, I was listening to something. I love nature references, and it was talking about the process of metamorphosis, where a caterpillar goes into the cocoon and then comes out as a butterfly. And what they were saying is, nobody realizes that when the caterpillar is in that cocoon, they need to digest everything about themselves apart from 2 cells. So they digest everything about who they were as a caterpillar. They are left with 2 cells, and those 2 cells then come together to create the butterfly they will be. So when I say that, and I talk about that reinventive phase, this is the time where you have to prune a lot of what has really served you well. So thinking about that, you progressed your career and you've had to prune. How has your, I'm going to go to you, Lisa, actually, how has your career changed and what have you had to prune that served you really well previously, but you've had to let go of it for this metamorphosis?
So one of the key things is having a good team building around you. And someone once told me, you should always hire people that can do your job better than you can. And I think having that really allows you to take a step away from being in the team and being there for everybody every single day to being a little bit further removed from that and focusing on the tasks that you need to focus on, because the people that are working for you can get on with that day job. They don't need you there every day, every 5 minutes saying, what about this? That's fantastic. It's good that you have that open relationship, but actually putting the trust in them, making sure, high level of delegation to make sure that they're really picking up on what they should be doing to allow you to take one step further away from that.
Lovely.
And I think double down on what you're really good at and what you're passionate about. So I think, again, you're across all areas, you want to be achieving kind of your maximum performance, but sometimes we spend a lot of time kind of focusing on where we're doing less well, and actually, again, making sure you're building that team, that network around you to be successful. But if you're awesome in one area, like really, really look at how can you leverage that to bring everybody forward, as opposed to actually, I'm probably not as good at X.
Yeah, and this for me, this is, the culmination of the first two phases. So in the first phase, you've really explored yourself, you found out where you get your energies from. The second phase, you sort of double down. And now's the time just to be really comfortable in your own skin, just to enjoy it. And for me, it's about giving back. So you mentioned legacy at the beginning. How can you look back and go, okay, yes, I run a business, I've got that job to do, but how can I leave a legacy in whatever area that you're passionate about or whatever sector you're in? For me, it's around diversity, equity and inclusion. And as an industry, how can we look back in 10 years' time and say, I did my bit to help change that dial? So it's really about thinking not just internally and your role and your family life, but it's looking externally into the environment. It might be ESG, whatever it is, but it's about being comfortable in your skin and giving back.
So my final question is going to be around joy, because that's my thing. How has who you were in your idealistic phase supported you to experience joy at this phase of your career? Okay, Ali, you've got to stop loving because it's keep coming to you like that.
I think I found a lot of joy in terms of building relationships, working with other people, problem solving. So again, once I kind of identified that was the bit that I really enjoyed, is actually looking at there's so many roles that you can incorporate that into, and making sure I'm spending the majority of my time actually being customer facing, getting into the problems, looking at how can we solve them together. And that's, I think, really does bring me that joy. But I think also as well is making sure is talk about legacy and as a leader what you want to be known for, thinking through that's my why. What does it make me tick? Why do I do it? And then trying to incorporate that as much as possible.
Wonderful, thank you. Lisa?
People, really. I think working with a number of different people and stakeholders in my early career made me realise that that's what I like doing best, and bringing some of the people on a journey with me, because where I am now, there's some people that I have new in my team, but some people that have worked with me for a number of years that I've kind of brought on along the way with me, and I get a lot of satisfaction from that.
Love that.
Yeah, we're all very similar. It is about that legacy, it's about people. And it's just in your first phase, you've got to know where you get that energy, that problem solving that Ali talked about, that people Lisa talked about. For me, it's then just encapsulating all of that and looking at how you can influence the people around you and giving back with mentoring, etc. But I get my joy from seeing people develop and enjoying what they do.
Love that, passing on the baton.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass the baton over to anybody that has any questions. Yes, please.
Yes. Everyone's in slightly different stages of this 3 phases.
Okay, Katie, we're just going to get your mic.
I was going to try and remember and then boom it across.
Hi, sorry. Everybody's at a different stage of these phases, and were you aware of the transitions when they happened from one phase to the other, and how did you know you had moved on and were ready to take on the challenge of the next phase?
I'll go first, Katie. Was I aware at the time? No. probably not as it happened. So as I moved into the second phase, probably the time I had my daughter, so it almost felt like it was because I was having my daughter that changed, and it took me a little bit of time to realise that actually things are different now, and I need to be different. And we didn't have conversations like this, so I was, I'm probably consciously incompetent or whatever the right phrase is at that stage. So no, it took me a little bit of time to realise, actually, I've now got to change my pace, I've got to delegate more, I've got to be different, I've got to learn to say no. So it took me a little bit of time to realise, but I don't know about.
Yeah, I think until I actually read about the topic for this discussion, I hadn't actually even appreciated that there were these different stages, and it really helped it make a lot more sense about actually what were some of the feelings around potential burnout and needing to get that balance as your home, well, outside of work continues to grow. So I think, yeah, kind of living it and going into it and actually then seeing, what some of the things that were mentioned and how they resonate.
Very much the same. I think, just some things happen that kind of force you into these situations, and then you have a little bit of time to reflect and think, oh, actually, that's why that's happened, to make me take a step back or do extra delegation or moving away from certain situations. So I think at the time you probably don't consciously think, right, I'm going to move from this stage into the next stage. It happens quite naturally in some cases.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's external factors or even with COVID, how that changed some of the dynamics. So in some ways, that being able to, like, I work hybrid in terms of being able to be at work and in the office and at home, there were some real benefits of that in terms of that work-life balance. But then there's a challenge really of actually where one does blend a lot more into the other. So I think, I didn't know if that was just more of a COVID thing or actually as you're progressing maybe through the different stages.
And that's why conversations like this are really important, because you don't know what you don't know when you don't know it. But when you do, we're meaning makers. And when we don't understand what goes on, we can get really confused, which can cause us to be really dysregulated and feel like we're in disarray. But when you recognize, actually, it's a transition. So, it's autumn. It's my autumn. I'm shedding these layers. I'm going to be a bit quiet for a little while, and then I'm going to emerge in this new phase, knowing what I'm doing. Or, okay, things are ramping up because it's spring and everything's blossoming, everything's becoming more active and more vibrant. So, come to more events like this because they really do support you in your career progression. Yes,
hey everyone, I'm Raja. Thank you so much for your insights today. So I know it's different for everyone, but on average, how long should we last the idealistic achievement phase?
How long is a piece of string?
I mean, if you read the theory, I think it sort of goes from 22 to 31 and then sort of 31 to early 40. So, but it's a bit like the menopause, I could say the M word, it can happen at any stage. So I think everybody's different, but there are, sort of chunks of time that we say you're typically at this stage up until 31, you're typically at this stage until early 40s, and then you get to my age and the rest is history. I don't know if there's...
I would say also, don't rush it. Because we are it's like we're more monsters, more, next, because we're very ambitious, which is great. But there's a lot to be taken from really taking the time to integrate your experience so that it's embodied. You're not doing it as a tick box, right? Okay, I finished my idealistic phase, I'm rushing into the next phase. There's a lot to be said for taking the time to really appreciate where you are. So yes,
and it felt like there is blurring as well between the stages. Like I could definitely see the bits that resonated across each of the different stages as well, as opposed to one category finishing and the other one starting.
And I think external factors as well, like having children, for example, or if you've got elderly parents, someone you need to care for, that can happen at all different stages of people's lives. So I think that also has an impact on.
And you mentioned the M word.
Yes.
Going through that transition can shove you back into that idealistic phase because all of a sudden everything's changed, but it looks the same.
Yeah. I think your point, Tamu, on don't rush it. I've got an amazing career. I was never ambitious. I just enjoyed the moment. And then as I enjoyed it, I got better at it. And then I took on the next challenge. So I think sometimes it can be to your point, the tick box of, I've done that, what's next? I've done that, what's next? Enjoy the journey.
Joy is a really great supportive tool for ambition, and you don't even know what's going on at the time. I saw a question. Yes. Oh, sorry. We'll go there and then we'll go back. Sorry.
Hi, just to say, fantastic discussion, really, really fascinating. So thank you. My question is, what do you see the similarities or the differences in between the phases of a man's career?
I'm passing that over to Kelly.
I think, to be fair, there will be similarities. So I don't think it will, it's going to be mutually exclusive, male to female. And obviously, I can only really speak on behalf of female because that's what I am. So I think there will be differences, and I think there'll be different challenges. And hopefully, as we get gender equality, they'll be similar and not as dissimilar as maybe they were when I was in the first stage. Or probably more so in the second stage, where it's probably more on me to do more of the family stuff than maybe it was at that time for the man. So differences, and welcome, there's lots of men in the audiences, they might want to give a view.
Whilst everybody is waiting for the men to speak up.
No pressure.
Okay, brilliant. Because we still live with very traditional gender roles, there is that conflict. And what comes up a lot with women, and we spoke about this when we had the briefing call, is guilt.
Yeah.
Because you want to be doing your best everywhere, and that's not possible. And sometimes the notion of work-life balance feels like we've got to spread ourselves thinly, like margarine, all over the place, where that's not possible. I saw that. Were you really going to say something?
Yeah, I can comment.
Can we have the microphone?
I can.
Oh, we've got two.
Should we wrap up with that question, then I'll pass over to one more question. Yeah, there you go. Oh.
Hi. So yeah, male perspective on interest. I suspect we all see it slightly differently, but I think the three phases do seem to resonate. Like, I don't think they're vastly different, but I suspect our experience of them is different. So speaking as I lead our co-lead our gender group at Marsh, and so I'm constantly trying to understand this and see it through a perspective that I'm not experiencing. I also have a wife, and I live that, and we have young children, and again, she's sort of contemplating what to do her career, so I see that from a personal lens as well. And I think that the challenge I see is that this middle phase, which is where from a career perspective we see so many women drop out or take a pause, or sort of take a career path that doesn't progress at the same pace as their male colleagues may have done. You're talking about joy, but we've got the word endurance in that middle section, and those two kind of, to me, feel like in conflict somehow. And certainly, seeing it through my wife's experience, it's really hard, and I'm not convinced in reality that you can have it all. I think it will always be a struggle and really hard, whoever the primary caregiver is, trying to balance career and child rearing at that stage. Not everyone has children, but if you are balancing those two things, I'm sorry to say my perspective is I don't think it is possible to have joy, great career progression, family balance perfect. I just feel like it's something we'll all strive for, and it will always be a challenge.
Thank you. I've got lots to say, but I'm not going to say it because this is signalling.
Hi, thank you. That's been really insightful. I think I agree that the three phases of the career feel the same, but I've got a 18-month-old daughter, and I think what I have seen is I actually work in a HR team. I'm a head of D&I, and I work in a HR team where I'm the only man on the leadership team for HR, and I'm the only one with young children. The rest of my colleagues don't have children, so I really have seen the gender agenda from a really different angle in the last 18 months, because I've seen firsthand from a parent perspective that kind of loss of confidence I think that my wife felt when she was going back to work, and just that self-doubt that she had. And if I'm honest with you, in an environment perhaps where I don't think that they are doing as much as our sector is doing to try to raise awareness around the challenges that people face. So I think it is different. My day job tells me that it is different. I see the data, I see the differences that people kind of experience from having conversations with them. And I think that what I've also realized, and I've had to learn sometimes across the dining table when I'm talking to my wife, when we've managed to get our daughter to sleep, is that, I might try to empower her, to push her, but I've had to learn to respect her boundaries of her ambition has changed. I actually still sometimes say, really sorry, can't make bedtime tonight, because I tried to do that. But I can fall back on her to be the one who does that. And that's something that even as a head of D&I think that I need to try to learn to respect that boundary, because I almost take that away from her. But it also works for us because I think that we realise that what I've seen from her firsthand, I might push her to be like, oh, well, you should fight for this or fight for that. But she doesn't want to push like that anymore. And I think that's been the real change that kind of I've had to respect as a husband, but as a head of D&I, I've had to kind of respect those conversations of, you know, people going through that, the changes during that pragmatic phase, whatever it might be, you know, will have a change in perspective. And often, you know, those changes I think are different depending on if you're talking about having children, whether you're the birth giver or perhaps not. So it's been learning to respect that, I think, is what I've had to do.
Very, very helpful, enlightening. In fact, I'm just coming over here to get the microphone because we've got one more question and then we're going to wrap.
I hope everybody was taking
questions
notes.
online.
Oh, we've got questions online.
Quite a few questions will come through
I'm sorry,
online.
can we have one question online and then we're going to end with you?
So just very quickly, as a woman with imposter syndrome, one can get stuck in phases 1 or 2. Any tips for moving beyond that?
I think imposter syndrome can come out in phase 1, 2, 3 and back to 1, 2, 3. So I think no matter where you are, that can come out. And I think it's just then looking at the positives, trying to, you know, remember why you're doing what you're doing. So I don't think there's necessarily a difference. I think sometimes you think you've got to the final stage, therefore you're comfortable in your own skin, you'll never get imposter syndrome again. Certainly in my personal experience, that's not the case. You still get imposter syndrome. So I think it's being realistic that it might always be there. Hopefully for some people it's never there, and that'd be amazing. But for me, it's still there.
And I think that's where things like this and being able to share those experiences helps you realise that, oh, I don't need to rush to get to 3 and it's going to go away. Is actually, how can I learn the techniques to manage it throughout my whole career?
And having that inner support network, whether it be in or outside of work or both, is really important to help with that.
Absolutely.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So I was going to ask, what sort of advice would you give to someone like me? So I had my little boy at 22 coming out of uni, so I almost had that sort of dropout career student stage first, and then now trying to really sort of like balance that, say yes to everything, but now I'm really in sort of that middle phase of also balancing childcare, things like that. So it's almost like cramming the first 2 stages into one and playing catch up. So what advice could you give maybe for people who do it a bit of a different way?
I think, you know, everybody's on their own journey, and I think it's just trying to take the best bits out of each phase and don't try and say yes to everything, would be the first thing I'd say. So say yes to the things that you really think are going to, you know, bring out your energy, bring out your joy and be additive, but also don't have regrets with your child. So, you know, there's times where we've got to make compromises, I get that, but what are the boundaries where you say, I will not miss that, I will make sure I do that. So really, you know, being clear about what's important at home, find ways of being comfortable to not say yes to everything, and find out what it is you want to say yes to, and prioritise and be organised like you've never known. Have the kettle ready with the water before you go to bed so it's on first thing in the morning.
Would you like to contribute?
I would just add to that, like, definitely, you know, following on from what Kelly was saying, you just need to set the boundary and say, I am doing this, and just communicate it internally to where you're working. If you need to get to work at 9:30 instead of 8:30 or 9 o'clock because you're doing the school run every morning, that works for you. I think just communication is key, and that personally really works for me. And I had my son when I was quite young, and it was pre-COVID. You couldn't work from home, you couldn't do flexible things, and I just had to say, this is what I do, and it works as long as you communicate it. I think it's fine. I think you're fortunate now that we live in a much more flexible working environment.
And I think find those allies across your organisation, and again, it comes back to that network. So finding those people that, you know, either they're living and experiencing it, and it might be so they've got some ideas, but also just, who can you lean on, who you can actually work together, and in terms of being able to both be successful.
I would also recommend reading. You can read the book or the blog post, The 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware, I think her name is. And one of the top ones was regretting working so much. So thinking about the different phases, we also need to recognise the phase we're at in our lives. Sometimes it's just not possible to do all the things we want to do. So we need to be really selective about what it is we are doing and give up. Like I use the butter analogy. We don't want to be spreading ourselves thin like butter or margarine. We want to be like a dollop of clotted cream on a scone. So what's going to enable you to be like that dollop of clotted cream? Because, you know, you can make up time in your career to a lesser or greater degree, but your child's never going to take their first steps again, or is never going to have their first night in the nativity when they're an angel way at the back, but you've still got to be there. So it's about working out what your priority is and being discerning. And as Kelly talked about earlier on, holding that boundary with yourself. This is who I want to be. This is how I want to live, and allowing that to be your guide. In my book, I talk about the fact that we've got a really strong work ethic, but we don't think about our life ethic. So we need to think about, well, how do I want to live, and how am I going to create the work recipe that's going to support that, without making me, you know, fumble the bag, as they would say on TikTok. Lisa, how are we doing?
About 3 minutes.
Another question in the last, yes. Where is the microphone?
Thank you for your contributions, they've been great. I would like to ask, how would you navigate a career change when you're going into your pragmatic phase, mentally and practically? Because you might be doing something for a few years and feeling quite comfortable with it, but I think like the nuances of starting again can be quite scary.
I mean, that's a really tough one. So as I was going into that phase, you know, silly, I was pregnant and started my masters at the same time, and I was going into that phase. As you do, but and it's tough. I think it is tough. So first of all, accept it's going to be tough, and then create those boundaries. So whether they be your life boundaries, your work boundaries, and just because you need, when you're doing something new, whether it be a new career or a new qualification, it requires a lot of energy. You almost need to go back into the first stage and find that energy again, which can be tough. So it's then, what are you willing to give up? Because we don't want to be butter, we want to be that dollop. But to be that dollop, you've got to give something up. And that might be, you know, you socialise less, or, you know, so there's something that's got to give, and but you decide what that is, and nobody else.
Yeah, and I think while there's going to be some new things, and obviously looking at the techniques to learn those, apply them, also how much you have learned already and how much you can then take those transferable skills, because there's probably so much that you can offer them that actually they may not even be considering now. So I think it's being able to apply those transferable skills too.
Would you like to add anything, Lisa?
No, I was actually going to say pretty much exactly the same thing as Ali. So yeah, all the skills you learn at some point will be interchangeable. Yeah. So,
and you know what? It's okay to be a beginner. You know, we have this notion that, well, I'm 30, I should not be a beginner again. We can begin at any time, and it can be a beautiful adventure. This kind of like hyper independence, I need to know it all, otherwise I'm going to look like a fool. I think you've just got a really beautiful experience to add to what you've already gained, the transferable skills. Okay. We've run out of time. We've come to the end. I would like to thank you all so much, Lisa, Ali, Kelly, for your wonderful contributions. Thank you for these really brilliant questions. I'm going to be thinking a lot about the male perspective because, to be quite honest, I don't often think about that. I hope you've made lots of notes, and please do share your experience on your intranet if you've got one, on social media. That would be really wonderful. But for now, I'll say thank you so much. Take care.